Southside.
If you need to leave, you can excuse yourself at any moment. But we're just going to have some time for Q&A for anybody up here. So if you have a question or a comment, raise your hand.
For those of you who are leaving, thank you for coming.
Maybe we'll just have like.
Oh my god, that's great.
Alright, so don't be shy. Anyone have a comment or a question about anything about the process of writing it, acting? If not, I'm going to start asking you all questions.
Hold on, you gotta test me.
Yeah. And do the test JD has to take.
This is the second round, and it's been like a little bit of time. Is there something that you guys have?
Yeah, I felt like the first time when I performed, I felt like really nervous, to be honest, and I felt like having another time to go around, like I was really able to like center myself and like my piece. So I think it was like a good opportunity to share that sentiment.
Yeah, I think like this piece, my experience in school is like pretty like mirrors a lot with what I talked about in the piece in terms of like whitewashing of history. But I think in between the last performance and now, like something about performing it just like really made me like go back and think a lot more intentionally about like specific classes that I was in and like specific ways that like my teachers taught books. So this time I feel like when I was talking about Miss Hamilton, like there were like 6 other names of teachers I've had throughout my like educational career that I could have substituted for Miss Hamilton and said the exact same story.
I feel like since last time that I performed together, I feel that a lot has changed in my voice, and I think a lot has had to do with this. Like we had to do like little diction exercises and like projection, and like for me that's personally very, very helpful. And also because I think now I think of that last line, which is and I proved her wrong, more seriously, like more intentionally, because I think before it didn't feel like social anxiety was quite validated until very recently. So now it feels like I can be proud of those things that I do feel that I'm good at, which include observation. So I think now I feel more happy.
actually. You say in your note here that you were able to get monologues from all different cultural and geographical backgrounds. Can you just speak about how like the process of that work, and then also how you transferred that into casting, like also where you found so many amazing actors and actresses? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So for the interview process, so I co-wrote this with another tough student, Becca McLean, and we each interviewed 5 different individuals that we already knew. They were both educators or students, and they are from across the country, since we're from different states and know people from different states coming at Tufts. So that's what I meant, from different geographic locations. And then also we tried to get a variety of racial diversity. So we had like white students. There was a lot of Latinos that we interviewed, and Black students as well. But it was a small sample, so obviously just 10 people, you can't really talk to everybody. But the process of writing them, we taped our interviews, and then for myself I can speak about, I just listened to it over and over and kind of just thought about what was the main story that I wanted to focus on in that piece, and just started kind of writing. I really don't have like a formula for it, I just kind of started writing it, and some of them are more like poetic and others were more as a monologue. I just changed it up. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah.
Were these stories somehow like collected or recorded to be distributed? I just feel like they're so important for like people outside of this room to hear. I'm personally working, like I'm asking because I'm working to create an educational nonprofit, and like I have a mostly white team, and it's really hard to get like actual like this kind of like substance across to them. Mm-hmm. And I just like I would love for them to be here, you know?
Yeah. Well, we are having a videotape, so we will have the videos on YouTube probably. So I can send you that link.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that seeing the performance is a lot more powerful than reading it on paper.
Yeah.
But I mean, some people like to read poems too, so I have it in text format as well. Oh, and I forgot the answer to your last question was how I found this amazing cast. I mean, I just put audition notices out, and I had a really good turnout for auditions. Actually, more people than I had space for audition, which was really difficult as a director to cast. But I did intentionally try to match the ethnicity of the author or the story, if it was something that was important to that piece. So a lot of them did talk about identity, and it's very important for me that if you're talking about being Latina, that the actor is Latina. So representation in theater has a lot of times been dominated by white people, even if the parts and the roles are not even white. So that was something I intentionally tried to do in casting, and get a lot of POC up on stage. Yeah.
So it goes to everybody on the cast. I want you guys to each define what identity means to you.
Well, whoever has an answer.
It could be anybody, but it doesn't be all you guys. Just be collective answers. I really want to know.
Make an answer.
Let's think about it.
Can you go first? What does identity mean?
For me, identity is what you make it. You know, like it's not something that you're inherited. It's not something that you have. It's something that you make out of it. Like, it's just something that you express. It's not something that you accept or retract. It's just something that you just share. It's like it's unexplainable, but it's just something that you just like let go. I don't know. I just wanted to see what you guys want to know. You guys are the only people that I got. I ask everybody.
I think I don't know how I would describe it, but I think I know how I make sense of it. And I think that's the borders. Like through those like categories, but I'm gonna call them borders because borders are anything. It could be physical, it could be mental, it could be age-wise, language-wise, gender-wise. And so I feel like identity is made and made sense of when you are in those, you live in those borderlands, in those, between those borders. So I think that's how I try to make sense of it. Because I know, because borders also constantly change. So that means your identity is also constantly being affected.
I will say actually to add on to that a little bit, I feel like identity is always tested when you're, facing obstacles, facing pushback, like you're tested and people question who you are and what you say you are. And so I think that every time you face something like that, your identity is always revealed to be something new, it's maybe something you didn't know before. And so identity is so dynamic, it's always changing. You never know what you are really, and that's kind of exciting, but it's also scary. But that's why we have like mistakes and failures and like scary things in life.
I do think so. This is not like the sole function of identity, but I do think that identity can kind of like, as a side thing, be like a barometer of where you are on like our grand privilege scale. Like if you've never thought about your identity, or never, like the fewer times you've thought about it or had to defend it or had to, have it questioned, chances are the more privilege you have. It's not like a perfect metric, but like if you think about it, if you're constantly proving yourself versus if you're just kind of like, wow, like I never thought about my own identity, period. That says something about where you fall societally.
I think going off of that, I didn't really think about race very much until coming to Tufts. Like I was just from Minnesota and just kind of hanging out in the cornfields. But being multiracial has been something very interesting that I've never really had to address before, and like kind of the piece that was spoken about, like where you fit in, like am I Asian, am I white, like what does that mean for me? And I think identity is something that you create yourself, even though like a lot I feel like is pushed upon you, like obviously people assume things and judge you like right off the bat, but hopefully like you can come into your own and what that means to you, which can be extremely hard at times, especially in places that push you like Tufts or any stressful environment. Any other questions?
This is a comment turning also into a question, but I appreciate how you use U.S. nation rather than like U.S. country or nation state, because I lived in both New Jersey and Thailand, and I went to an international school in Thailand, but a lot of these stories of what you're being taught in a U.S. Curriculum, I realized were so transferable, or I when I was listening, I was like, wait, I didn't even live in the U.S., but I was still getting a U.S. nation education. So just like how that, like the idea of a nation isn't confined to, like a geographic boundary, but kind of like really you see like how globalized that is, and but yeah, so and then I guess the question part also, like are there any international students up there that could maybe like also talk about your experiences, like how you experience education, yeah, or like you have parents who are international or like have lived outside the US, like what that education was like.
So I grew up in Hong Kong, and I went to an international school there, but I went to a private boarding high school here in the States, for high school. And so I definitely resonate with what you said, Dunya, about how, I always thought I lived in Hong Kong and someplace totally different and separate from, these borders here. But then, everything from like my English class, we were reading, like everything we were talking about, all the culture that we were referencing, it was always oriented towards America, which was, I think, definitely an adjustment period, but I probably didn't notice it at that time. When you're that young, you're just struggling to adapt and survive, kind of, in this like weird instinct. And so I definitely think that those things I got used to, and then coming here to the U.S. Definitely in your piece, at least when you were talking about like African literature, like I took a class called Africa and Latin America, and like we read Things Fall Apart, and that was like the only, like, yeah, that was definitely the only book. Yeah, and so it was, I think that I thought that my international experience would inform me more in my education, but then it's terrifying and scary to know that how the miseducation of the U.S. nation is just like permeating even like past the borders here.
To add to that, I was born in Cuba. My parents I received all my education and schooling in the United States, but my parents received their education and schooling in Cuba. I was born there. And I thought it was really interesting, at least I've made these connections that, you know, like Cuba, your education is like very controlled by the government, and sort of what they tell you is what they wish you to know. And it really reflects what the people in power want you to know. And I think it's funny because we judge this country so much, and we like ban communism so much, and we talk so much crap about it, but we come here and our education is also shaped by the people in power, and our education is only what they want us to know too. So it's kind of like, well, you know, the differences aren't that big, the bridges aren't that wide. So.
I was still ruminating over the piece that you presented about Democrat, and when you talk about your teacher, the white teacher trying to present like a black lit class. But then I sort of like puzzled out the idea of, do you think it's a good thing, like at least the white teacher is still making an effort to understand, although she made a mistake. Is it better than not doing it at all? Like even though maybe the school realized like we could never represent someone else's culture with a teacher who's not ethnically belong to that order. So like, what do you think is better, the flawed education or no education?
Well, yeah. Well, I think it is always super complicated. I think one of the things that really like I both resonated with and like really like made me really angry reading this piece was the way that like, yes, this white teacher is teaching like about Africa, but in all of her teaching, she's centering whiteness and white voices. So like all the books that she taught were by white authors. Like she was the only one who was in control of it. Like I'm right now at this moment, I'm like projecting a lot onto like how this theoretical teacher theoretically would have created this curriculum. But like I think there are ways that like white teachers can teach, but it has to be like so much more complicated and troubled than it like really ever is in classrooms.
I think your question is really valid because it comes up a lot. Like, is it better to have like try and like do something that needs to be done, but then do it wrong? And I think that every instance can be different. It's very much an individual. Like in some circumstances, the damage might be worse than like just like sticking to what you know, because there's always ways where you can bring in somebody who actually is like knows about that topic to teach, or choosing something that you are qualified to teach. So I think that it all has to do with like your intentions in doing so and like thinking about it beforehand. But
yeah, I think to tack onto that, sort of what I get out of that piece and sort of thinking about that more broadly is the idea of like, you know, band-aid cures and shortcuts. You know, whether it's saying like, I'm white, so we're gonna learn about Africa, or you know, like hiring a teacher who's maybe not qualified just because like they showed up as a person of color and you decided you needed a diversity hire. Like things that sort of are just kind of like, we get that there's a problem, and so we're gonna do something very quick and call the problem solved. And, like, just sort of like close the book. I think that's what I get out of the piece that I was reading, is sort of the idea of, you know, yes, you can try, but like how hard did you really try?
any other questions?
So my question pertains to kind of like a mixed race identity, because that was brought up in a lot of the narratives and something I've been thinking about as well. I think there's a big like bridge that children of mixed race parents, of mixed race marriages, their parents have to take the burden of trying to bridge that gap. So it's like, for me, I feel often that I'm educating my dad about my mom. So maybe to the mixed race students up there, how have you kind of dealt with that? How do you keep yourself sane while doing that? And like also, maybe even not just like directed to mixed race students, but like in terms of bridging any gap of like trying to get the other side to understand, like people who haven't come here, you know, there's still that gap between us in this room and people outside. How is that gap bridged? Like, or best ways to do that?
I think kind of like in a literal sense, like you are that bridge, and it's not the mentality of like this side versus the other side, but understanding that there is middle ground. Like it's never like a black and white economy. There's always like a middle ground, and you are literally that middle ground, and that's kind of just something that you like maybe accept, maybe don't. I know in my family, it's really weird for me to think about, and like my parents are so together. Like literally, how are you guys still together? Very happy and very blessed to have them still together, and I love them. They like literally make no sense, and it is difficult bringing up those kind of conversations with them, especially like both like in the same room, kind of like yeah, there's an argument, and just like, do you understand what I'm saying or what I'm trying to bring up on the table? And also kind of going off, like, it's better, like, I think it's better to be informed, at least trying to talk about the situation or what you believe is important, because if it's important, then you have to weigh the option of, like, how important is it for you to bring this up? Like, yeah, there are going to be consequences. It might be awkward and not so fun, but if it's going to be worth it, and that person is also worth it to you, like, that's your family, and that's like a part of who you are. I think, I mean, there's so much to gain in that discussion.
I find actually that my siblings are very helpful, because we have, so I have two brothers, and we also, even in sort of the mixed race lottery, we happen to look fairly similar. It's a sort of, we're racially located about the same, and especially, growing up, I realized that, I spent, so also for background, the monologue that I read was sort of like co-written collaboration, like that's there was someone who came in our 4th grade classroom and like told us to all join the army. But like growing up, it was a lot of sort of like there's dominant white culture, so I spent a lot of time focusing on basically the POC side. And that was sort of one of those things that like people just thought was kind of cute. And they were like, oh, that's great, like you're mixed race, you're like a symbol of how America is post-racial and all this stuff. And actually it's taken steps, for example, like when I started critically unpacking whiteness, and I was like, Dad! And he was like, no. Dad! And he was like, no. I will say, though, that the last time we performed this, he came here and he sat in the audience, and so, like, you can make progress, and I realize I'm casting this as a very, like, oh my god, it's perfect, if you just try hard enough, like, everyone will come around. They won't, but I do think that, like, I found a lot of comfort, for example, in my mixed race friends and in my siblings and in people who sort of understand that, when you have, at least in my case, when you have a white father and like a Vietnamese mother who still is trying to like take off the model minority cloak, like you're not just this like perfect, like ideal collage of the two of them, you're actually your own separate person. And so the more you can sort of understand that, but understand that like chances are that people in your life, especially those related to you, like, I found as much as I like get frustrated with, I talk about cultural appropriation and my mother's like, no, they like us now. And I'm like, no, they really don't. That's not what this is about. Or, my dad sort of being like, I think people need to be less emotional when they talk about racial things. Like, even though those have been difficult conversations, for me at least, I find that sort of remembering that underneath all of that, like as sappy as this sounds, they are people who love you. That's helped me personally. That sort of helped to go through the sort of like conversations that I cannot believe you just said that. Like, can we talk about that?
Yeah, that's actually literally what I was thinking. So I don't identify as mixed race, I identify as Latina, Dominican American specifically. And if you know anything about like the Latino community, there's a lot of homophobia, a lot of like anti-blackness. And so those are challenges like somewhat separate. But I think for me it was really helpful to start having these conversations with my mom, especially because she's a single mother. When I started to recognize that like these are systems that we're like all functioning under and we're all tainted and none of us are perfect and none of us know the actual answers to everything, even though we would want to. And so, because I think when I first started to unpack like my own identity and where I fit societally and all of these different things, I did have a lot of built up anger, like what the hell, like all of this is happening and I don't know how to like stop any of it because it's just kind of happening and I don't have control over it. So I think that it started for me when I started to recognize like, okay, like we're all functioning under these different systems and like you're gonna get from that system whatever you can because this is your experience based on like how you look, where you come from, et cetera, et cetera. So that made it easier for me. And I also don't think that academia helps at all, which is like what I was gonna say, because I can't tell my mother cultural appropriation. She'll look at me and be like, what the hell is that? So I think that adds another layer of like how complicated that can get if we're learning how to talk about these things amongst ourselves, but we can't translate that to bring it back to our families. And that's something that I found extremely difficult. So just to kind of add a little bit to that, but.
I also don't identify as mixed race, but one thing that I have been thinking about bridging is myself now with my family's indigenous roots. And I think that is its own way of bridging because it's sort of trying to make sense of a mixture of one thing that hasn't even been brought up, one thing that's completely erased. And I think that through education, I see that very much through language. Because, for example, now I learn English, but I know my parents wanted me to keep Spanish. But yet, in order to keep Spanish, I didn't learn my family's indigenous dialect. And so now I think it's very difficult. Also, so difficult to have those conversations with my family because we're also very experiencing indigeneity in very different ways. Physically, I think I don't have to experience the same experience with indigeneity that my mother does. And it's also, I don't know, for her, it's difficult to have conversations because for her, being called indigenous, brings up so many other emotions that perhaps if I want to feel empowered by the word indigenous, I also have to remember that that is also very different for others. So I think right now I'm at a position where rather than trying to identify with indigenous, I'm trying to make sense of the ways that indigeneity was stripped away through generations. So I think that's where I am going.
Any other questions or comments?
Sorry, this is the second question. I just got inspired by one of the lines that you said when you were answering the last question. Is that like none of us know the full answer, something like that? And weirdly, this line never occurred to me. Because like I thought like eventually through this academia, through our experience in human society, we'll know more and more about the society and become less biased. But what I'm thinking right now is probably about something that we don't experience ourselves, but then are like troubling other people. We might be informed of it, but then not like getting a really accurate understanding of it, like eventually or never. And like some biases are just never gonna disappear, but that's okay or that's natural. Well, I don't know if I'm making sense, but like it's just something that inspired my thinking.
All right.